So now let's explore some church statements. Now, you've probably noticed my approach. I usually talk from a Catholic perspective because that's the church I grew up in um, and I still work for. But um, I obviously have great admiration for other churches as well, followers of Jesus Christ, who um, are my brothers and sisters in the faith, and I've learned a lot from reading church statements from other churches as well. So I'll be describing the Catholic Church's church statements, a few of them, but you can also look up on Google, for example, church statement, and then you add your denomination, and you can find other church statements that are really interesting. Laudato Si is the one that has the biggest reputation. The encyclical on ecology, on integral ecology, and it was published in 2015. It was kind of, I wouldn't say rushed because it's high quality, but they didn't waste time in writing it. And the reason why it was published in 2015 is because a few months later, there was the Paris Agreement, the Paris Conference to start off with. And there were really high hopes that we finally get to an agreement internationally with all countries on board. And that would be, a first. And so Laudato Si was going to bring some ethical and spiritual light to those discussions coming a few months later, and probably more involvement, more engagement. And by hearing what happened behind the scenes in Paris, it did have an impact, thankfully. It's very difficult to measure, but people who were there, lots of them had read Laudato Si, and it gave further motivation to act. But Laudato Si has kind of eclipsed all of the other church statements that have been made, and they're really interesting to look into. Here's one. In 2008, the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops were reflecting on the environment and wrote this beautiful message. It was called our relation to the environment, a need for conversion. And this is in one of the last paragraphs. Only genuine conversion will help us mend the ruptures and reestablish our life relationship with nature, our sisters and brothers, and the creator of life. So that is poetic and also very inspiring. And one that I absolutely have to talk about was the letter by Bishop Luc Bouchard of the Diocese of St. Paul in the northeast of Alberta. He wrote a pastoral letter called The Integrity of Creation and the Athabasca Oil Sands. This was in 2009. And here's what he writes. It is therefore impossible for me to ignore the moral problem created by the proposed $150 billion oil sand development. Or plural, oil sands development. It's an amazing letter. I put it in the documents below if ever you want to read the whole thing and quote it for your own means. But here you have, someone from the church really taking a stand on the moral implications of developing that type of energy. And so these are just two church statements, but there are so many. Back to Laudato Si. It is very hard to try to summarize Laudato Si in just a minute or two, but that's what I'm going to try to do. It's 200 pages, and it talks about the environment from different perspectives. There's one chapter about science, one chapter about the Bible, one chapter about, ethics, one chapter about social justice, and another one on spirituality. So 6 chapters to explore. and it's relatively easy to read. So I do suggest you explore that. If I had to give you 3 takeaways in Laudato Si, it would be these. First of all, praise. Praise the Creator for the beauty of creation. Okay, this is the basis of Christian ecology. Christians won't be acting for ecology like other ecologists when it's sometimes based in fear. We're fearful of more destruction, we're fearful of the future. That's what drives some and a lot of ecologists that I've met. But it's not the basis why Christian ecologists act. It's because of this praise. It's because they sat down once and would see a landscape and it would move them. It probably happened to you. You were just so moved that there's this sense of awe, and that leads to praise. And so that praise, that sense of awe and praise, is the basis of, the reason why we're acting to take care of the world. Second point, the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor comes a few times in the encyclical. And so why is this so important? Well, when we look at the root causes of environmental destruction and the root causes of poverty, systemic poverty, well then in that case, we look at the roots and we find the same causes, the same sinful origins of what's happening. And we have to work on that. So we should be sensitive to both those cries, which are basically the same cry. And the third takeaway is that everything is connected. The expression, everything is connected, is the expression that is repeated the most times through the whole encyclical. And it's, directly related to what ecology is all about. Ecology is it's the study of the interdependence of all the creatures. So basically we realize that so many things are connected, and that is one of the reasons why we have to act. Because when we start destroying parts of that connectedness, well then the system starts breaking apart. So yeah, Laudato Si, in just a few minutes, those are the takeaways. Now, I'd like to just say a few words on the backstory of Laudato Si, at least my part of it. So I sent my book, Greening Your Church, which I published in 2014. As soon as it was published, put it in an envelope and sent 2 copies. One was for Pope Francis, and the other one was for Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI. And I had no idea what they were going to do with it, if they were going to read it or not. Hey, I sent it, and I'm very happy to have done so. I got this nice letter saying they received it, and they were saying they were thankful for it. And at that point in 2014, there was this rumor that the Pope was probably working on a major document on ecology, but we still had to wait. And so finally, I got the chance to speak a few days after the publication of Laudato Si. I got the chance to speak to the Secretary of the Commission for Justice and Peace in the Vatican. And I spoke with him, and I brought my book and I gave it to him. And then he said, "I've seen this book before. It was on the table, and it was being consulted by the experts that were writing Laudato Si." And I thought, oh yeah, that's really interesting. He said, yeah, it's part of the resources that influenced the writing of Laudato Si. And he makes a big smile. And then I went back to my own book and reading Laudato Si, and I thought the sections about the Bible were very similar. The content was very, very similar. But then I finally fall on this passage. In page 25 of my book, I was talking about how we are not the owners on earth. God remains owner. And so I put three passages, one from Psalms, one from Deuteronomy, and another one from Leviticus. And I write this, and then I find in paragraph 67, Laudato Si, exactly the same three passages in the same order. And I thought, okay, this is plagiarism. And I think I couldn't be more proud or more happy to have been plagiarized by the Pope. Speaking of popes, now that I've finished my anecdote, speaking of popes, here is the evolution of the four last popes and how the message has changed. Okay, so Paul VI was probably the first to, talk about the environment. He was there at the Environment Conference in Stockholm in 1972, and he has this great quote: "Human creativeness will yield true and lasting benefits only to the extent to which man respects laws that govern nature's capacity for regeneration." It's basically sustainable development that's being described there. So that is great. Also, he was still in a period where the church was still almost obsessing on the importance of development. Okay, maybe not from a so much capitalist point of view, but really like development helps the poor communities to grow and come out of that poverty. So he talks about environment, but there has to be the sense of development in there. He doesn't really talk about the intrinsic value of nature. It's just the way we act towards nature should be more responsible. So, great declaration, great statement. I hope you'll read it. And now I move on to John Paul II. Now, John Paul II, before he became Pope, he was young once, and you can find pictures of him in a kayak with youth, even celebrating Mass on a lake on a kayak. He was really a big nature goer, and so had a special relationship with God's creation, obviously. But when it comes to his statements, he just couldn't. It was hard for him. It showed it was hard to talk about the environment in the writings. He does so many times, but he can't talk about the environment just by itself. It always has to be linked to poverty. So this quote is a great example. "The proper ecological balance will not be found without directly addressing the structural forms of poverty that exist throughout the world." So obviously, I'm all for the fact that we need more social justice and take care of the poor. But it's just surprising that he can never talk about ecology without talking about the poor. Then we get to Benedict XVI, who has a totally different take on ecology and environment. He is the first Green Pope. We can describe a bunch of things about him, but when it comes to environmentalism, he was really amazing, and his statements are spot on. Here's a quote: "The Creator who gave it an inbuilt order and enabled man to draw from it the principles needed to till it and keep it." So what I'm trying to get at is that Pope Benedict talks about the environment, and it's kind of interesting coming from a German Pope that he really insists on the order in creation, and that things go bad when we don't respect this order in creation. He has a very poetic way of talking about it, though. At one point in one of the passages, he says that knowing that every creature is the Word, was created by the Word of God, every creature becomes a word, and we have to understand the grammar of creation. I thought that was a great way of saying ecosystem, but in a poetic way. Bravo, Benedict XVI. And finally, that leads us to Francis, Pope Francis. He finished, at the end of the encyclical, he says this: I ask all Christians to nurture that sublime fraternity with all creation, which St. Francis of Assisi so radiantly embodied. So, wow. We went from Paul VI, who is still obsessed by the idea of development, how good it is, to John Paul II, and him, it all has to do with poverty. And then we get to Pope Benedict, who sees intrinsic value in creation, but still slightly detached, talking about the order. And then we get to Pope Francis, who talks about fraternity, who talks about loving creation and recognizing that relationship we have with it, that interconnectedness. So we've come a long way in church statements, and they are sometimes quite powerful. It goes farther than the Bible and the church fathers in the fact that they talk about these modern issues directly with our theology. And so you're invited to explore them. I hope they're useful to you, and they might inspire the people around you.